The clinking of crystal died instantly. 30 armed men held their breath as Camilla, a timid 22-year-old waitress, looked dead into the eyes of New York's most feared Sicilian godfather. Then, her lips parted, and she spoke a dialect so ancient, even the devil would have frozen in his tracks. To exist in the upper echelons of New York's underground elite, one had to master the art of invisibility. Camilla Rossi was a masterpiece. At Il Giglio, a hyper-exclusive, Michelin-starred fortress tucked behind an unmarked, wrought iron door in Tribeca, Camilla was just another shadow in a starched white apron. She wasn't the head sommelier Arthur, who could sniff out the difference between a 1,985 Sassicaia and a 1,990 with his eyes closed. She wasn't Chef Thibault, whose temper tantrums over bistecca alla Fiorentina were legendary. She was merely a runner, a quiet, unremarkable girl who kept her head bowed, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes firmly glued to the Italian marble floors. Camilla liked it that way. Invisibility meant safety. It meant surviving the grueling shifts and taking the subway back to her cramped, drafty apartment in Astoria, where the memories of her late grandmother, Nonna Rosa, still clung to the peeling wallpaper like the scent of dried basil and old secrets. But invisibility was becoming a luxury Camilla could no longer afford, entirely because of Domenico Falcone. Domenico was the heir to the Falcone syndicate. At 32, he possessed the kind of striking, lethal beauty that made people instinctively cross the street when they saw him coming. He wore bespoke charcoal, Carasini suits that cost more than Camilla's life insurance policy, and his eyes were the color of a bruised winter sky. Every Tuesday evening, Domenico booked the private VIP alcove at Il Giglio. He rarely brought guests. He rarely ate more than a few bites of his osso buco. Instead, he drank his espresso and watched Camilla. It wasn't a leering, uncomfortable gaze. It was something far more terrifying. It was a calculating, heavy observation, as if he were trying to solve a complex puzzle that irritated him. Camilla could feel his eyes on her spine every time she walked past table 4 to clear a plate or fill a water glass. She trembled under that scrutiny, terrified that a man who practically owned the eastern seaboard had noticed the mouse scurrying across his floor. But tonight, Domenico's quiet obsession with the shy waitress was the least of her problems. Tonight, Il Giglio was closed to the public. The velvet ropes were pulled tight, the steel shutters were drawn, and the air inside the restaurant hummed with a suffocating, frantic panic. Don Salvatore Falcone was coming to dinner. Salvatore was Domenico's father, the supreme head of the family, and a ghost who had ruled his empire from the fortified hills of Corleone, Sicily, for the last decade. He hadn't stepped foot on American soil in 12 years. His arrival in Manhattan had sent shockwaves through the criminal underworld and the NYPD alike. Rumors swirled in the kitchen, whispers that the Don was here to formally pass the crown, or perhaps to execute a traitor within his own ranks. "I need those truffle shavings paper thin. If I see a chunk, I will take your fingers," Chef Thibault screamed, his face a blotchy purple as he hurled a copper saucepan into the sink. Camilla stood by the service station, her hands shaking so badly she had to grip the edge of the mahogany counter. The restaurant was swarming with men who didn't look like the usual Wall Street billionaires. These men wore ill-fitting suits to hide the bulge of shoulder holsters. They spoke in low, guttural tones, securing the exits and sweeping the kitchen with cold, dead eyes. "Camilla," hissed Francois, the maître d'œuvre, his usually perfectly coiffed hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. Table set up. "Now, the capo di tutti capi is 3 minutes away. Do not look at him. Do not speak to him. If he drops a fork, you do not exist unless someone explicitly tells you to fetch another. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Francois," Camilla whispered, her voice barely a breath. She hurried out to the main dining room, checking the heavy silver cutlery and the baccarat crystal glasses. As she adjusted a linen napkin, she remembered her Nonna Rosa's calloused hands gripping her shoulders when she was just a little girl. "Hide your blood, Clarusa," her grandmother used to whisper in the dead of night. Speaking in that strange, harsh dialect she forbade Camilla from ever using outside their apartment. "The old country is a graveyard. We are Americans now. Never let them hear the island on your tongue. It carries a death sentence." Camilla had never understood what Nonna Rosa meant. She assumed it was the paranoia of an old immigrant woman who had fled poverty. Camilla knew the strange words, the ancient Sicilian proverbs and the heavy, rolling consonants of the Palermo dialect, but she kept them locked away in her mind, a secret language belonging to a ghost. The heavy oak doors of the restaurant swung open with a deafening thud. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet 10 degrees. Camilla pressed herself against the wall, melting into the shadows as Domenico Falcone strode into the room. He was a vision of restrained violence, his jaw tight, his broad shoulders stiff. But, for once, he wasn't looking for Camilla. His eyes were fixed on the entrance. Behind him walked a man who seemed to suck all the light out of the room, Don Salvatore Falcone. He was older than Camilla expected, leaning heavily on a polished silver cane topped with a snarling wolf's head. His hair was stark white, slicked back, and his face was a roadmap of violent history, marked by a deep, jagged scar that pulled at the corner of his left eye. He didn't walk, he glided, an apex predator, inspecting a new cage. Domenico Salvatore rasped, his voice sounding like two stones grinding together. He spoke in Italian, sharp and unforgiving. "This is the palace you waste your time in? It smells like French butter and weakness." "It is the finest establishment in the city, Papa," Domenico replied, his tone perfectly even, giving nothing away. "Sit, drink." Camilla stopped breathing. The invisible girl closed her eyes and prayed to a god she hoped was listening to let the night end quickly. For the first hour, the dinner was a masterclass in suffocating tension. 6 men sat at the long, candlelit table. Salvatore sat at the head, Domenico to his right, and 4 terrifyingly quiet underbosses filled out the rest. The silence between courses was heavy enough to crack the marble beneath their feet. Camilla watched from the peripheral shadows, a silent ghost ferrying empty trays back to the kitchen. Disaster struck right before the main course. Francois, carrying a silver tray, holding a $15,000 bottle of vintage wine and 6 crystal glasses, clipped his heel on the edge of the Persian rug. He didn't fall, but he stumbled. The glasses clinked violently, and a single drop of the dark red wine splashed onto the pristine white tablecloth directly in front of Salvatore. The entire restaurant stopped. The music seemed to die in the speakers. Francois turned ash white. "Don Falcone, forgive me, 1,000 apologies. I will replace the linen immediately." Salvatore slowly raised his hand, 2 fingers extended. The movement was barely noticeable, but the 2 massive bodyguards flanking the door instantly stepped forward. "Get him out of my sight," Salvatore said softly, in Italian, not even looking at the trembling maître d', "before I lose my appetite entirely." Francois was practically carried out of the room by the guards, leaving the silver tray teetering on a side table. Chef Thibault, watching through the kitchen porthole, shoved Camilla violently in the back. "Take the tray! Pour the wine! Go! If they kill you, bleed outside!" Camilla stumbled forward into the dining room. She was entirely exposed. The invisible girl was suddenly standing in the harsh spotlight of a Mafia tribunal. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She approached the side table, picked up the heavy crystal decanter, and walked toward the head of the table. She could feel Domenico's gaze lock onto her. It wasn't his usual observing stare. It was a flash of pure, unadulterated alarm. He didn't want her near his father. Camilla stepped to Salvatore's right side. Her hands, usually so steady, betrayed her. As she poured the rich, blood-red liquid into the Don's glass, the lip of the decanter trembled, tapping against the crystal with a sharp clink. Salvatore stopped cutting his steak. He slowly turned his head, his scarred face inches from Camilla's apron. He looked her up and down, his dark eyes stripping away her flesh to look directly at her bones. He didn't see an American waitress. He saw peasant trash making noise in his presence. Salvatore scoffed, leaning back in his chair. He looked across the table at one of his older underbosses, a man named Enzio, and spoke in rapid, deeply accented Sicilian, a specific, harsh dialect from the slums of Palermo. "T'addarita che non sapi volare," Salvatore sneered. "Questi cani randaghi americani. Non sanno nemmeno versare il vino senza tremare come foglie. Sangue di contadini ignoranti. Si fanno bere con le mani sporche. A bat that cannot fly, these American stray dogs. They don't even know how to pour wine without shaking like leaves. Blood of ignorant peasants. They make us drink with dirty hands." The men at the table chuckled darkly. Domenico remained completely still, though his jaw clamped tight enough to shatter teeth. He opened his mouth, perhaps to dismiss her, to save her from his father's cruel amusement, but Camilla didn't give him the chance. Something snapped inside her. It wasn't bravery. It was a visceral, involuntary reaction. It was the echo of Nonna Rosa, the pride of a bloodline she didn't even fully understand. The words bypassed her conscious thought, rising from the deepest, most hidden part of her soul. Before she could stop herself, Camilla took a half step back, squared her shoulders, and looked down at the most dangerous man in America. When she spoke, her voice wasn't the timid whisper of a waitress. It was steady, resonant, and entirely foreign to the room. She didn't speak in standard Italian. She spoke in the heavy, archaic Palamitano dialect, the exact tongue of the men sitting at the table. Vosia ma benedica, Don Salvatore, Camilla said, her words slicing through the air like a straight razor. You rispettu e misuratu, culu porta, lavi portatu, aimi manu ponnu tremari, ma me sanguinune di fango. Bless me, Don Salvatore. Respect is measured. He who brings it has it brought to him. My hands may tremble, but my blood is not made of mud. The reaction was instantaneous and apocalyptic. The chuckles died in the underboss's throats. Enzio dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against the china. Every single bodyguard in the room stiffened, their hands instinctively dropping to the grips of their firearms. The air pressure in the room seemed to violently plummet. Domenico Falcone stood up. The heavy oak chair scraped viciously against the floor. He stared at Camilla, as if she had just ripped off her face to reveal a demon beneath. The cool, calculating air was gone, replaced by a man looking at a live grenade that had just pulled its own pin. But it was Salvatore's reaction that froze the room. The old Don slowly turned back to Camilla. The sneer vanished from his scarred face, replaced by a look of profound, terrifying shock. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the wolf's head of his cane. He stared into Camilla's dark eyes, and for a fleeting, impossible second, the great Don Salvatore looked like he had seen a ghost rising from a grave he had dug himself. The dialect she used, the specific cadence, it wasn't something you learn on Duolingo. It wasn't something you picked up from a tourist trip to Taormina. It was the language of the old families. The deep, hidden roots of the island's darkest history. "Who are you?" Salvatore whispered. His voice was barely audible, yet it commanded the absolute silence of the room. He didn't ask it in English or Italian. He asked it in the old tongue. "Cusi tu? Pixarida? Who are you, little girl?" Camilla realized, with a sudden, suffocating wave of terror, exactly what she had done. The invisible girl had just painted a target on her own, back in neon blood. She backed away, her hands flying to her mouth, the heavy crystal decanter slipping from her grasp. Domenico lunged forward, catching the decanter an inch before it shattered against the floor. He slammed it onto the table, stepping between Camilla and his father, his broad back acting as a shield. "She is nobody, Papa," Domenico said, his voice a low, dangerous warning. "Just a waitress. A mistake. Move!" Domenico Salvatore commanded, his eyes burning holes through his son to lock onto Camilla. "I asked the girl a question. I want her name. I want her father's name. Now." Camilla couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. She looked at the faces of the killers surrounding her, and then at the back of Domenico's suit, the only thing standing between her and a man who looked ready to rip her throat out to find the answers hidden in her veins. "Rossi." Camilla, choked out, her voice breaking. "My name is Camilla Rossi." Salvatore's eyes narrowed into slits. A terrifying, slow smile spread across his scarred face. "Rossi," he repeated, tasting the name, knowing it was a lie. "Take her to the back room. Nobody leaves this building." The descent into the subterranean levels of Il Giglio felt like a march to the gallows. The grip on Camilla's arms was unforgiving. The thick, calloused fingers of two towering enforcers, Matteo and Silas, digging into her flesh through the thin cotton of her uniform. They dragged her past the frantic, wide-eyed kitchen staff, down a narrow concrete stairwell, and shoved her into the restaurant's climate-controlled wine cellar. The heavy steel door slammed shut, severing the ambient noise of the kitchen. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and freezing. Camilla stumbled on the stone floor, her knees scraping against the rough slate. She was surrounded by floor-to-ceiling racks holding thousands of bottles of the world's most expensive vintages, dusty bottles of Tenuta, San Guido, Sassicaia, and rare Giacomo Conterno Monfortino that were older than she. But the intoxicating smell of aging cork and damp earth offered no comfort. It smelled like a crypt. The door clicked open again. Footsteps echoed on the stone. Slow. Rhythmic. Accompanied by the dull thud clack of a silver-tipped cane, Don Salvatore stepped into the dim amber light of the cellar. Close behind him was Domenico, his face an unreadable mask of cold marble, though a muscle in his jaw feathered violently. Enzio, the underboss, flanked them, his hand resting comfortably inside his tailored jacket. "Leave us," Salvatore commanded in English, waving a dismissive, liver-spotted hand at the two guards. Matteo and Silas slipped out, locking the door behind them. Camilla pushed herself backward until her spine hit the cold wooden wine racks. She pulled her knees to her chest, trying to make herself as small as possible, trying to reclaim the invisibility that had kept her alive for 22 years, but it was gone. Papa Domenico started, his voice a low, vibrating hum that commanded the small space. He stepped smoothly between Camilla and his father. "This is a gross overreaction. She is a civilian, an Astoria nobody who picked up a few phrases from a dying grandmother. You are disrupting operations over a waitress." "A waitress?" Salvatore scoffed, leaning his weight onto the snarling wolf's head of his cane. He stepped around Domenico, refusing to let his son break his line of sight with Camilla. "Look at her, Domenico. Look past the cheap apron and the trembling hands. Do you know what she said upstairs?" "She insulted you," Domenico said smoothly. "I will handle her discipline. You do not need to soil your hands." "She didn't just insult me, you blind fool," Salvatore hissed, his voice dropping into a deadly, rattling rasp. He pointed his cane at Camilla's face. "Respect is measured. He who brings it has it brought to him." He recited the English translation as if it were poison on his tongue. "That is not a peasant's proverb, Domenico. That is the family crest motto of Don Calogero Licata." Domenico went entirely still. The subtle shift in his posture was terrifying, a predator suddenly realizing there was another apex killer in the room. "The Licatas are dead," Domenico stated, his voice devoid of emotion, though his eyes darted to Camilla with a new, burning intensity. "You wiped them out in Bulgaria in 1994. Every man, woman, and child in the compound. Every man. Every child. But the wife," Salvatore stepped closer to Camilla, the tip of his cane stopping inches from her throat, "Rosa Licata. She vanished into the Mediterranean night with the youngest daughter before my men could burn the East Wing. We spent millions hunting them. Rumors said they drowned off the coast of Palermo. Other rumors said they fled to America, buried like rats in the concrete." Camilla's heart stopped. The blood roared in her ears so loudly she thought it might deafen her. Rosa. Nonna Rosa. The strict, paranoid old woman who kept 3 deadbolts on their peeling Astoria apartment door. The woman who never allowed her picture to be taken, who refused to apply for a bank account, who kept wads of cash hidden inside the lining of old winter coats. The woman who wept violently on the anniversary of a fire she claimed took her true family in the old country, forcing Camilla's mother to grow up a nameless phantom in Queens. Camilla's mother had died of pneumonia when Camilla was 7, exhausted by a life of running from shadows. Nonna Rosa had raised her, drilling the harsh rules of survival into her skull. "Hide your blood, Clarusa." Camilla looked up at the scarred monster standing above her. This man wasn't just a mafia boss. He was the butcher who had slaughtered her grandfather. He was the reason her grandmother died clutching a rosary in a freezing apartment, jumping at every siren. "My name is Camilla Rossi," she whispered, her voice shaking, desperate to cling to the lie. "You are crazy. I don't know any Licatas. You have Calogero's eyes," Salvatore whispered, a sick, nostalgic smile stretching his scarred cheek, dark as pitch, defiant even when staring at the gun. "And you have Rosa's arrogance. Only a Licata would be stupid enough to challenge a Falcone with an empty hand." Salvatore turned his head slightly toward his underboss, Enzio. "The Licata bloodline ends tonight, right here, among the French wine. Leave her in the foundation of the new casino." Enzio nodded, his face impassive. He drew a suppressed Heckler & Koch USP from his jacket. The sleek, matte black weapon looked unnaturally large in the dim lighting of the cellar. He racked the slide. The metallic snick echoed off the stone walls like a judge's gavel. Camilla squeezed her eyes shut. She thought of her cramped apartment. She thought of the half-eaten bagel on her kitchen counter, the stack of overdue electric bills. She thought of how utterly useless her life had been, a shadow hiding from a storm that had finally caught her. She braced for the impact, praying it would be fast. But the gunshot never came. Instead of a gunshot, a deafening, metallic crash shattered the silence. Camilla ripped her eyes open. Domenico had moved with a speed that defied his massive frame. He had kicked the heavy silver cane out from under his father, sending the old Don stumbling backward into a rack of wine. Bottles shattered, raining vintage Bordeaux and shattered green glass over the slate floor. Simultaneously, Domenico's hand had blurred beneath his charcoal suit jacket. Now, he stood squarely in front of Camilla, his broad back entirely shielding her. In his right hand, a custom Sig Sauer P-226 was leveled dead at the center of Enzio's forehead. "Lower the weapon," Enzio Domenico said. His voice wasn't raised. It was calm, chillingly conversational, which made it infinitely more terrifying. "Or I will paint the vintage racks with your brains." Enzio froze. His suppressed weapon still pointed in Camilla's general direction, but his eyes darted nervously to Salvatore, who was struggling to right himself against the broken wood and spilled wine. "Domenico!" Salvatore roared, his face turning a furious, mottled purple. He wiped a splash of red wine from his cheek. It looked exactly like fresh blood. "Have you lost your absolute mind? You draw a weapon on your own blood for a stray dog? For a licata?" "I draw a weapon on a man pointing a gun at what belongs to me," Domenico replied, his arm steady as a steel beam. Camilla gasped, pressing her hands against the cold stone floor. "Belongs to him? She is a threat to the syndicate," Salvatore spat, using the wall to stand up, his chest heaving. "If the commission finds out a Licata heir survived, that she is breathing in our city, the old loyalists in Sicily will rally behind her name. The war will reignite. She is a political bomb, Domenico. She dies tonight." "No," Domenico said, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating with a dark, territorial finality. "She lives, and she is coming with me." "You cannot save her just because you want to bed her, you arrogant fool," Salvatore yelled. "She is the enemy." "I am not saving her for my bed, Papa. I am claiming her for the throne," Domenico shot back, his eyes locked on his father. "You are an old man, terrified of ghosts. You want to kill her to stop a war? That is the thinking of a butcher. I am a king. I don't destroy my enemies' bloodlines when I can absorb them." Salvatore stared at his son, the realization dawning on him. "If I claim her, if I wed her," Domenico continued, his words cold, calculated, and sharp as broken glass, "the Licata loyalists in Corleone and Bulgaria will not rise against us. They will bend the knee to the Falcone syndicate. The blood feud ends by a merger of blood. I am securing the empire you are too blind to hold on to." Camilla felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She was bargaining chips, a living, breathing piece of territory to be conquered and assimilated. She looked at the back of Domenico's immaculately tailored suit. He had watched her for weeks. Did he know? Had he suspected who she was all along, biding his time, treating her like a chess piece? Or was this a brilliant, psychotic improvisation to save her life? "The commission will never allow it," Salvatore hissed. "I am the heir. I will make them allow it," Domenico said. "Enzio, I will count to 3. If that H and K is not on the floor, you will not have a head left to nod with. Uno." Enzio swallowed hard, the silence stretched, tight as piano wire. "Do..." Enzio slowly bent his knees, placing the suppressed handgun onto the stone floor, stepping back with his hands raised. He knew Domenico's reputation. The son was far more ruthless than the father, unburdened by the old world's emotional vendettas. "You are making a fatal mistake, my son," Salvatore whispered, leaning heavily against the broken wine rack, his eyes burning with a venomous hatred. "You turn your back on your family for a ghost. You will not survive the week. I will put a bounty on both your heads so high, every hitter from Manhattan to Montreal will be hunting you." "Then let them hunt," Domenico said. Without lowering his weapon, Domenico reached back with his left hand, his large, warm fingers wrapped around Camilla's trembling wrist. His grip was entirely different from the brutal handling of the guards. It was firm, possessive, and oddly grounding. "Get up," he ordered softly over his shoulder. Camilla scrambled to her feet, her apron stained with dust and her knees bruised. Domenico pulled her behind him, keeping his body between her and the 2 men. He backed slowly toward the heavy steel door of the cellar. "If anyone follows us out of this room before 5 minutes have passed," Domenico warned, his eyes locking with his father's, "I will blow the gas line in the kitchen and bring this entire building down on your heads. Do we understand each other?" Salvatore didn't answer. He simply stared, committing his son's betrayal to memory. Domenico shoved the cellar door open with his shoulder, dragging Camilla out into the hallway. The moment the heavy door clicked shut, the facade of the cold, calculated air cracked. Domenico grabbed Camilla by the waist, practically lifting her off her feet as he sprinted down the narrow staff corridor toward the alleyway exit. "Move!" he barked, shoving open the heavy fire door. The freezing night air of Manhattan hit Camilla like a physical blow. They burst into the damp, garbage-strewn alley behind Tribeca. Waiting at the curb, its engine idling with a low, predatory purr, was Domenico's black, heavily armored Mercedes Maybach S, 680. The driver, a massive man in a black suit, immediately threw open the rear passenger door. Domenico shoved Camilla into the back seat, diving in right after her. "Drive, Leo!" "FDR South. Now!" he roared. The Maybach's tires squealed against the wet asphalt, the V12 engine roaring to life as the luxury tank shot out of the alleyway and merged violently into the late-night Manhattan traffic. Inside the cabin, the heavy scent of plush leather and expensive cologne was suffocating. The tinted windows plunged the back seat into near-total darkness, illuminated only by the passing amber glow of streetlights. Camilla pressed herself against the far door, her breathing ragged and shallow. She looked at Domenico. He was calmly ejecting the magazine from his Sig Sauer, checking the rounds, his profile illuminated by the passing city lights. He looked entirely unfazed, as if he hadn't just declared war on the most powerful crime family in America. "Did you know?" Camilla asked, her voice cracking. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, sharp terror. "Did you know who I was when you came to the restaurant?" Domenico snapped the magazine back into the grip with a sharp click. He slowly turned his head to look at her. His striking eyes traced the lines of her face, lingering on her lips before meeting her terrified gaze. "No," Domenico answered smoothly, sliding the weapon back into his shoulder holster. "I watched you because you were the only beautiful thing in a room full of monsters. But tonight you proved you are a monster, too, Camilla Licata." He leaned closer, the scent of bergamot and gun oil wrapping around her. "Your grandmother hid you well," he whispered, his voice dark and heavy with a promise she couldn't interpret. "But you are hidden no longer. My father will burn this city to the ground to find you. The only way you survive the sunrise is by my side. Welcome to the family, Modly Mia." "My wife?" Camilla stared at him as the Maybach merged onto the FDR drive, the glittering skyline of New York blurring past her window. The invisible girl was dead. And the woman who had taken her place was trapped in a gilded cage with a king who had just crowned her his queen in blood. The Maybach tore through the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan, leaving the glittering skyline behind as it crossed the George Washington Bridge. The silence inside the cabin was thicker than the armored glass separating them from the storm outside. Camilla sat rigidly against the plush leather, her mind a violent tempest of shock and adrenaline. She stared at Domenico Falcone. The man who had silently watched her for weeks had just shattered his own empire to pull her from the executioner's block. He sat opposite her, his expression unreadable as he typed rapidly on a heavily encrypted satellite phone. The pale blue light illuminated the sharp, aristocratic lines of his jaw and the faint smudge of his father's blood on his French cuff. "Where are we going?" Camilla finally asked, her voice raspy, stripped of its former timid shell. "Teterboro Airport. Signature Flight Support Terminal," Domenico replied without looking up from the screen. "I have a Gulfstream G 650 ER-fueled and waiting. We are flying to Montreal. I own a secure penthouse atop the Ritz-Carlton on Sherbrooke Street. My father's men cannot operate in Canadian territory without triggering a war with the Rizzuto Syndicate. It buys us exactly 48 hours. 48 hours until what?" Domenico finally set the phone down, his striking, winter sky eyes locked onto hers. "Until the commission demands a sit-down. My father is already making calls. He will frame this as a son's treasonous madness, claiming I was seduced by a rival bloodline. He will ask the 5 families for permission to hunt me down and execute us both." Camilla swallowed hard, the reality of her new existence settling into her bones like lead. "And what will you tell them?" "The truth," Domenico said smoothly, leaning forward, the space between them suddenly crackling with dark electricity. "That Don Salvatore Falcone is a relic, a paranoid old man who nearly started a global syndicate war over a 22-year-old waitress. I will tell them that I stepped in to secure the Licata bloodline, proposing a marriage that unites Corleone and New York under one unbreakable banner. They value profit over vendettas, Camilla. A merger makes them money. A war bleeds their offshore accounts." Camilla looked away, staring out at the blurred lights of the New Jersey Turnpike. "You are using me." I am just a political shield for a coup you've been planning for years. A low, dark chuckle rumbled in Domenico's chest. I will not insult your intelligence by denying it. Yes, I have been planning to dismantle my father's archaic regime for 18 months. But you? He reached out, his warm, calloused fingers gently lifting her chin, forcing her to look at him. You were the catalyst I never saw coming. When you spoke in that cellar, when you looked the devil in the eye and recited Calogera's crest, you didn't just give me an excuse to act. You proved you were strong enough to wear the crown. His thumb brushed against her lower lip, sending a terrifying, involuntary shiver down her spine. I didn't just save a pawn tonight, Camilla. I secured a queen. But a queen must know how to play the board. The Maybach violently decelerated, pulling through the heavy security gates of Teterboro Airport. They bypassed the main terminal, driving directly onto the rain-swept tarmac, where a sleek, black, private jet idled, its engines whining over the storm. As they boarded the aircraft, the sheer scale of Domenico's wealth and power became suffocatingly real. The cabin was a masterclass in understated luxury, walnut paneling, cream leather seats, and a fully stocked crystal bar. Two heavily armed men in tailored suits stood guard near the cockpit, nodding respectfully as Domenico entered. Take us up, Leo, Domenico ordered his head of security. Camilla collapsed into a wide leather seat, the exhaustion of the night threatening to pull her under. But as the jet taxied down the runway, a dormant memory sparked in the back of her mind. It was a memory of Nonna Rosa sitting by the radiator in their Astoria apartment, clutching a small brass key on a velvet ribbon. If the wolves ever find you, Clarusa, her grandmother had whispered, pressing the key into Camilla's young palm. You do not run. You open the box at the Chase Manhattan branch on Wall Street, box 814. You take what is inside, and you buy their throats. Camilla sat up straight. The timid waitress was entirely gone, burned away by the fires of the night. In her place sat the last surviving heir of the Licata syndicate. Domenico, she said, her voice cutting through the hum of the jet engines. He looked up from pouring 2 glasses of Macallan 25. Yes? You said your father will try to turn the 5 families against you, Camilla stated, her dark eyes flashing with a dangerous, calculating light. You are relying on their greed to keep us alive. But what if we gave them something better than a promise of peace? What if we gave them a weapon? Domenico paused, the crystal decanter hovering over the glass. He slowly set it down, his full attention snapping to her. Explain. Nonna Rosa didn't just flee Sicily with me in a few old proverbs, Camilla said, her heart hammering, but her voice remaining remarkably steady. She was Calogero's wife. She kept his books. She left me a safety deposit box at a J.P. Morgan Chase vault in Lower Manhattan. She told me it contained the leverage to buy their throats. Domenico's eyes widened, a rare crack in his flawless composure. The Licata ledgers. The commission assumed they burned in the Bulgaria fire. My father spent a decade tearing Sicily apart looking for them. They contained the original blackmail, the political bribes, the offshore accounts, the buried bodies of every major boss who helped my father rise to power in the 90s. If we have the ledgers, Camilla continued, leaning forward, realizing she was no longer a hostage, but a partner, we don't have to ask the 5 families for permission to survive. We can dictate the terms of your father's retirement. We can strip him of his allies before he even calls a sit-down. Domenico stared at her in profound silence. The tension in the cabin shifted from protective dominance to genuine, stunned awe. He walked slowly across the aisle, sitting in the seat directly beside her. He handed her a glass of the amber liquid. You realize what this means? Domenico asked, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur. If we do this, there is no going back to your quiet life in Astoria. You will be feared. You will be hunted. You will be inextricably bound to me, in blood and in business, until the day we die. Camilla looked at the glass of scotch, then up into the bruising winter sky eyes of the man who had flipped the underworld upside down for her. She thought of her cramped apartment. She thought of the fear that had dictated her entire life. She was done hiding. I know exactly what it means, Camilla said softly, raising her glass. Vosia ma benedica, Domenico. Domenico's lips curled into a slow, devastating smile. He tapped his crystal glass against hers. To the new regime. Moglie mia. Camilla Rossi died that night on the cold floor of a Tribeca wine cellar, but Camilla Licata was reborn in the ashes of a broken empire. What began as a simple slip of a forgotten Sicilian tongue ignited the greatest mafia war New York had ever seen, proving that the deadliest players are often the ones you never notice.